Amsterdam could be completely underwater in a matter of just 50 years. We've spent too much contemplating on what solution is best and to stay optimistic. It's time to bring real change. We have no time to lose. Proud to propose. Before we move on to Jane contextualization and set up this debate, let's do a few clarifications on what we define climate optimism and climate doomerism is and how we're going to apply this within our world. Firstly, within what scientific, we talk about this as in within what the scientific community presents to citizens in the real world. These are scientists that are giving reports, that are giving information on what to emphasize in terms of the climate. We're emphasizing climate doomerism. We want to tell the global community that they have to take extreme actions, not only to protect themselves, but also extreme actions for them to be protected that are enforced by the government. This means that we are emphasizing climate doomerism, but by no means does this mean that we are making Gulf bench exclusive to doomerism. We're also going to consider we're not eliminating climate optimism to an extent. We just want to put emphasis on doomerism for maximum, the maximum net benefit to occur. So what do we mean? What's the general context in today's debate? I think what status quo has shown is that people simply do not care as much. And even if to some extent we do care, I think the extent that people take on the actions to be environmental friendly are very limited. How do we know this? Because we've seen continuously the emphasis on climate change has risen exponentially throughout the past decades, but we haven't seen much change in terms of how much we're able to bring benefit to the environment. We tell you that unless that there is a huge enforcement that happens as compared to what is generally considered as a small advice for you to do, I think there's a lack of emphasis on how really the issue is bad that we're dealing with. So what do extreme actions look like, and what is the framing behind this? Firstly, there's two ways: A, lifestyle, and two, protection, right? So how does this apply to a lifestyle lens and spectrum? Firstly, there's for example, there's complete elimination of plastic bags in the nation that cannot be commercialized, I guess to the extent of cigarettes and drugs, where you kind of take this extreme and put plastic bags completely banned. But secondly, to an extreme quota on cars, only one household can keep one car, or remove all gas vehicles and replace them with electronic ones, so on and so forth, that policies that governments have continuously enforced, and we take on to the next level. We make this more extreme on that side, or things such as the degrowth movement, taking degrowth movement to a real serious extent and actually implementing this. But secondly, also throughout preparing for the worst, right? We know that doomerism also implies that we are doomed. This means that we want to make sure people are prepared for the worst scenarios. We don't want to give them the false hope that they might lose at the end of the day. We want to let them know that this is what they need to do. So this means preparing them for the worst. For instance, relocation, I've already talked about my hook. People who live in Amsterdam, people who live in the Pacific Islands will have to relocate within the next 20, 30 years if sea levels rise. Those living in coastal areas of the southern region of America will have to relocate. We want to let them know in prior on what they'll have to do when this happens. In extreme cases, there'll be bunkers or stuff like that they'll need to protect themselves from, hunger and famine, and being mentally aware. So what's a preemptive here? Opposition will probably come about in here, but it's saying that climate doomerism would actually, trigger less insofar as people are going to think they're doomed and they're not going to consider as much. What we tell you is that A, this is not true. Unless people get the shock and realize, hey, this is an issue, they won't really do anything, right? But B, people won't do anything if they know they are doomed. People will do stuff if they know they're doomed, right? I think this becomes a debate about emphasis. It's about how much emphasis we can necessarily put on doomerism, how much we're able to spread the word. And even if we don't get everyone, I think to a large extent, we can still emphasize it if people know that we're doomed. I think people kind of prepare for the worst scenarios, especially in countries that already have conflicts in terms of wars. They know what's going to happen. They know the worst, and therefore that's why they're prepared and able to flee when they need to. I don't think saying that, oh, we still have a chance, is going to help people in the worst cases. And we think that in the worst case scenario, opposition takes a worst case. But even if this weren't to be true, we still implement certain policies that essentially take extreme actions to protect, right? This meaning that they will realize that they can enjoy their current lifestyles for another few decades, or they can cut down and go degrowth, and then they'll enjoy it for a few more centuries. We tell you at the end of the day, policy implementation will happen anyway, and other governments where doomerism is emphasized are more likely to be able to abide to the policies because they know their future is defined by their actions. First argument on the urgency of the environment. A, climate doomerism often highlights the systematic failures that exist within our political, economic, and social structures and its whatsoever, right? So this leads to inaction or insufficient action that needs to be taken on climate change. I think by recognizing these failures, we can focus on reforming and replacing the systems to better address the global issue. But secondly, if people reach a consensus at some level to some level, climate disruption is inevitable, it can lead to more serious efforts in adaptation strategies. What do these look like? Preparing and mitigating for efforts of change that I've already framed. This includes building resilient communities, investing in sustainable infrastructure, and developing new technologies that can mitigate this impact. C, on our side, we bring changes that are direct and feasible, while on the upside, they can have make a bet on whether or not this change is going to make a significant change or not. So what does this look like under our case? A, explicit governmental campaigns that ban certain things that we've already talked about in framing. But B, humans adapt in the end. We tell you that at the end, even if at the first period where we talked about how this is going to be applied in a gradual period over like 5-10 years, right? If this changes over 5-10 years, we tell them in the end, in 20 years, they'll pretty much adapt to their new lifestyle because humans adapt to whatever their new environments are, right? So I think it's more about building the norms and trying to switch a way of lifestyle that we need to stick to because we've done so much in the past. So what narrative do we really want to push as government? The narrative we want to push is that unless we do ABC correctly and unless we follow like what the policies are given, we tell you that we cannot change much. This does not mean that we are completely doomed like by what the influence side says, but we want to make sure that people take extreme actions in the worst case scenario. So why is this like in terms of propensity analysis, why are people more likely to do this? If the focus is on united efforts that comes from opposition, then on the individual level, you feel like you're 1 in 8 billion, right? You don't think that you can change much because you contribute so less as compared to what the global population does. So many people just opt out of what the movement is. This happens in like large scale movements as well because they know that they won't really bring much change, right? This happens in voting as well because people know there's millions of people voting. One vote isn't going to change anything. And this is how voting like rates go down as well, right? In terms of suffrage. I think at the end of the day, this is the same analogy that applies. So what's the comparative here? A, we're able to take the metric of urgency because we're able to bring quick solutions, but B, in the long term, we build habits of being extreme. So we're able to like make the environment better in the long term. But C, principally, people have a responsibility to save the environment immediately. It is no longer something we can be essentially like we can be like scared of, right? At the end of the day. So second argument, climate optimism sugarcoats like the current issues. So what is the issue? A, climate doomerism focuses us to confront the harsh realities of climate change without sugarcoating the situation, right? If it is principally wrong to tell people that climate change can be solved with the united efforts, we need to emphasize that this requires a participation coming from an individual level. It strips away from the illusions of easy solutions and highlights the current urgency of the crisis. By acknowledging the severity, we may be pushed to take the situation more seriously and act more decisively. A, currently we tell people that in the future, ABC, thus we need to act, right? By hearing the term near the future, people realize that they're not the main stakeholders that are addressed at the moment. You see people procrastinating on an action that we have to take. So what's a comparative here? A, I think it's a principally legitimate thing to show reality that yes, we will run out of resources and we'll have to prepare for the worst. People also have to accommodate. But B, I think there's also a logical and principal priority here. Only when people realize their actions that they know their certain actions go against their ethics, that's when they start making progress. We tell you that we're able to take the environmental benefit and trigger people and save the world. Thank you.
Climate doomerism advocates for a view where people are not encouraged to make change, where extreme action feels so far-fetched that you have no choice but to instead brace for the upcoming apocalypse instead of trying to combat the apocalypse. What will I do in this speech? Firstly, a little bit of characterization. What does the current status quo of the climate situation look like? Does it warrant a view of climate doomerism, or is it still savable? But also, what does the scientific community look like? What is climate optimism and what is climate doomerism? And then I'll move on to a little bit of rebuttals onto opening opposition under two contentions. And then finally, I'll bring two main substantives in this debate. Firstly, about how we encourage action, and secondly, about how on their side they encourage a nihilistic worldview that permeates into every area of society. Firstly, then, on a little bit of characterization, what does the climate situation look like in the status quo? We said that the effects of global warming can still be minimized. Yes, global warming has its effects, and we can still see them now, but we can reduce carbon emissions, etc. Right? We say that climate doomerism, therefore, isn't the reality, right? And so therefore we say that if the scientific community tries to push climate doomerism, people will just think that they're crazy. But also we say that in contrast, climate optimism, as per their model, we can also say that we can have a balance of climate optimism, climate doomerism with an emphasis on optimism. That means that we can emphasize that climate change is definitely solvable, but that the issue is proximate, right? We emphasize optimism. We still remind people that the issue is proximate. Now, moving on to rebuttals on opening opposition then. Firstly, on a little bit on like the characterization that people will do stuff if they emphasize doomerism, right? That people will prepare for the worst scenario and that there's more policies will be passed. We say that this is completely untrue. What is easier, to not take extreme action because you think it's impossible and you think that the issue is so far gone that you don't want to take action, or to try and take that action when the odds are painted to be all against you? I feel like it's a lot easier to wallow in doomerism and not take action than to actually take that extreme action. No, thank you. But let's say even if they try to take this extreme action, I feel like this motivation to try to take extreme action doesn't really go to towards actually solving climate change. It goes towards bracing for the upcoming apocalypse. They try to stockpile food, for example, for the upcoming apocalypse, right? Instead of actually trying to like cut down their carbon emissions, because climate doomerism emphasizes the message that, oh, the world is doomed unless you take this very extreme action that is so far-fetched that you probably aren't going to take it in the first place. Now, moving on to their second argument on sugarcoating then and how it's principled to show them the truth. I've already explained in our characterization how this is not the truth, but also that people are not, already explained that people are not likely to take action because of all these methods, right? I don't think politicians are going to be very happy and pass climate policies when climate doomerism advocates for banning single-use plastics, right? I feel like if you want to get actual action passed in the government and like policies passed, I feel like it's a lot better to use climate optimism instead of climate doomerism. Now, moving on to our first argument then on action and how we encourage people to take action. There are two ways by which people on government do not take action on their side. The first scenario is that climate doomerism advocates for a scenario where there's no hope. Obviously, people don't take action because they're more worried about bracing for the upcoming apocalypse than fighting something that they know is going to, in their eyes, they know is going to fail. But also the second one, which they advocate for, which is advocating for extreme action, right? We say that people are still not likely to do change because people are less likely to take action when they see that the action that they have to do so much to fight climate change. It is a lot easier to not do those actions. But what do we do on our side? We say that people are reminded that the issue is proximate still under climate optimism, but the main tipping point here is that they're also reminded that they have the power to solve it. No, thank you. They are empowered to be able to solve it, and this makes the issue, in fact, more proximate to them. They feel like they have to counter this issue more because they know that they have an impact when it comes to fighting this issue. But also, thirdly, the reputation of the scientific community as a whole. Notice how the motion states that this is coming from the scientific community. Not only will people think that the climate movement is crazy for advocating for all this doomer stuff that a lot of people feel is not truthful, but it also decreases trust in the scientific community as a whole because they're pushing out this message. It decreases the ability, therefore, for the scientific community to counter climate change and other scientific and environmental problems. Before moving on to my second point, yes, a POI.
People have an inherent want to live, especially if the alternative is death. They just need to work really hard to be able to live.
Yes, people have the will to live. But then again, as I've stated in my rebuttal to OO, people use that will to live and that motivation to brace for the apocalypse instead of trying to solve the issue, right? They brace for the apocalypse by stockpiling food instead of going out and campaigning for policy change, right? Now, moving on to the second argument about how they influence people's beliefs negatively as a whole on their side. Firstly, the messaging of the scientific community has a large influence on people's lives, right? It's going to make headlines when people say, well, the climate is doomed. Nihilist messaging influences people's attitudes on life, right? This makes people feel powerless. This applies, therefore, not only to that person's view on climate issues, but it also applies to other areas of life because they're constantly bombarded with nihilist messaging. Therefore, they are less likely to, in other aspects of their life, ask for the promotion in their job, for example, because, hey, why should I ask for promotion when the boss is in control of everything, right? Therefore, this applies to wider society as a whole insofar that they are not proactive in combating any issues, right? For example, the climate issue, but also economic issues, because it's up to the will of the market, not to the will of the people. But also, secondly, we see that the mental health of the individual is also severely harmed because of this messaging, right? Because they feel powerless. Even if we say that even if we take the characterization that it's false hope, which I've already proven in their characterization that it's not, even if we say that it's false hope, we say that false hope is justified if it promotes action and promotes a better mental state. Practically, we say that giving false hope not only encourages people to take action, but also encourages people to have a more optimistic view on life. We say that false hope is good if it promotes action and practical benefits. And so because of all these reasons, Judge, if you want to vote for a side that actually encourages climate action and not bracing for the apocalypse while stockpiling food, please vote for our side. Thank you.
In the world where science community has already lost its reputation for only spending tax money and solving little to no problems, we see that in the long run of where the upside pushes, we see no changes coming from the citizens' minds. First, I'll go into some analysis, second into some rebuttals, and going on to our side. First, on the analysis, we tell you that the main stakeholders here are the citizens who are living in the world that is habitable. Right? These are the main stakeholders at hand, and we need to have solutions for these people. Now let's move on to some rebuttals. First, the opposition comes up this stage and says that, oh, since we tell these people that these climate changes are actually an issue, they can actually be aware of it and fix it in the future. However, we already tell you that in the status quo, citizens feel that current science innovation targeting climate change is really infeasible and takes a long time to show little to no significant changes that require taxpayer money. However, by implementing doomerism, we can mitigate such issues and revive public image of science and its community. And overall, breaking that stereotype that government and the science community is just coping with the environmental change, always with the long-term solutions that turn out to be not effective and always spend a tremendous amount of money and under the climate with hopes that the earth can still be saved with our measures. And here, the opposition prime minister comes up to stage and talks about how reputation from the science community can be revived. However, note that the science community has already lost its credibility in the status quo with this climate optimism showing no change in this status quo. I don't think scientific community has anything to lose at this point because they have no trust. Additionally, they talk about influence people's beliefs negatively. However, they don't feel powerless because this happens on all. Why is this true? Because our whole narrative that PM characterized in the first place is to engage individual action and make sure that everyone and each individual is going to contribute under this case. How does this work? First, we literally characterize this debate as telling you that governments are literally in a push to ban gasoline cars and do things that are under government policy, which also rebuts against the point against how politicians are not going to be in favor of it and how people don't have incentives to actually follow this. Additionally, under the opposition's claims about how politicians aren't going to be advocates of such things. However, we tell you two things. First, politicians who advocate for radical movement policies may use doomerism just to justify the needs for sweeping changes. By emphasizing the catastrophic consequences of the inaction, they can build a case for dramatic interventions such as banning fossil fuels, rewilding large areas, or implementing strict environmental regulations. In this context, doomerism can be a good tool to garner public support for policies that might otherwise be seen as too extreme in the cases where science communities already lost its trust. Second, some progressive politicians might align with doomerism to highlight disproportionate impact of change on marginalized communities. By portraying climate change as a disaster in progress, they can advocate for social and environmental justice measures, pushing for policies that address both climate change and systematic inequalities. Now, with that being said, I'll take any POIs before moving on to our case. Okay, no POIs, we see no engagement. First, we tell you that we amplify the voices and importance of scientific community. 3 layers under this. First, the sense of urgency and alarm generated by doomerism can drive the scientific communities to prioritize and accelerate research on critical issues such as climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This can lead to more funding, collaboration, and an innovation aimed at addressing the most severe impacts of climate change. What does this look like? High venture companies coming with ideas to cope with current status quo issues and actually finding key solutions such as Amazon, Google, and big tech companies that are related to science community. B, the scientific communities is acutely aware of the systemic barriers that impede effective climate action, such as political inertia, economic interests, and social inequities. Here, doomerism can underscore the inadequacy of current systems and policies, supporting scientists' calls for transformative changes rather than incremental adjustments. C, many scientists feel the ethical responsibility to communicate with the full extent of risk associated with climate change, even if this leads to uncomfortable conclusions. Doomerism can either way be for them to fulfill this responsibility, ensuring that the society is not misled about the other potential consequences of inaction. What does this look like? One mechanism through which scientists fulfill this ethical responsibility is by emphasizing the tipping points in climate communication. Tipping points here refer to a critical threshold of a climate system, beyond which small changes can lead to drastic and irreversible consequences, overall leading to, first, communication. Second, impact in the actual real world in which happens in the status quo. And third, fostering scientific research. Second, we tell you that it's going to improve the science community's reputation and overall put more value in what they spread. First, one layer of analysis here, by embracing aspects of climate doomerism, the scientific community demonstrates its commitment to transparency and honesty, even when delivering difficult or uncomfortable truths. This approach can enhance their credibility as it shows that scientists are not downplaying the severity of climate crisis to align with political or economic agendas, masking and sugarcoating the tremendous amount of need to actually cope with this tremendous amount of climate change happening in the status quo. And when scientists fully communicate the extent of climate risks, including worst case scenarios, they build trust with the public, representing a realistic assessment of what might happen if the action is if it's not taken. Now, last, why do we win over the opposition bench? Changes happening in the status quo are only exclusive to all in this debate. We tell you that these measures are taking time right now. We tell you that not only does opposition not mechanize how this looks on their side, what this ambiguous plan that they're talking about in this debate, this is exactly why opposition case does not exist in the first place. They do not give you a feasible and pragmatic picture on the what opposition world looks like. We tell you that, on the other hand, what the emphasis loads on our side. We tell you that these policies, under how long we're going to take to implement this action, it's just not randomly the next day you're going to be building bunkers in the tundra. It is a gradual process over 5 to 10 years that can mitigate their whole impact, a whole harm of mental health, right? Because we tell you that people are adept, and sure, we can take the trade-off that they may live in the satisfactory life for a while, but at least they're able to bring change and live an extra couple of decades, or even in our worst case, die knowing that they will die rather than randomly one day to starve from hunger and die. At least they can enjoy the rest of their lives knowing that they can have some times left rather than just randomly dying in one day because they pushed and listened to the sugarcoating ideas that the government and the scientific communities proposed. Thank you.
If you're a single individual in an Earth filled with 7 billion people, are you likely to think that you're able to take extreme action and solve an issue that scientists literally tell you is already doomed? I don't think so. In this speech, 3 main things I want to focus on. Firstly, on reputation. Secondly, on making politicians and governments to try to make change. And lastly, on individuals. Firstly, on the reputation of the scientific community. We tell you that the reputation is likely to decrease because it feels like the things that scientific communities are speaking is very untruthful and very extreme in a way, right? They tell you that the scientific community has already lost its reputation. This is not true for a few reasons. First of all, why did it lose its credibility, right? They don't exactly explain this. We believe that optimism sounds like a more doable thing and sounds like a more realistic stance in terms of what climate change looks like, right? Not every single person feels like the climate is going to be ruined in within 50 years. I think it's the vast majority of people don't believe that climate change is as extreme as they frame it as, and therefore the shock factor is unlikely to work in the sense that they're unlikely to believe what they're saying because it seems like such an extreme thing. Nobody has ever seen an apocalypse happen within Earth, and therefore the assumption of scientists trying to push that as something will happen like this very closely doesn't seem very realistic and very proximate, and therefore that's why you're less likely to actually have you're less likely to have a good reputation on their side. Second point, then, on the idea of politicians and trying to make policies, I would like to point out something here very crucially before I move on to this argument, which is on the idea of where we tell you that you're likely to brace against climate action instead of trying to take action to solve this, right? They completely dropped this within their DPM speech, and this is already a very big case that's kind of rebuts most of their cases, right? For example, even for politicians and for governments, they're still unlikely to make change, right? Because even if you're a regional politician for your own province, you don't feel like your change matters because climate change is a very global thing. Every single country if you take doomerism, it sounds like it's impossible to solve. It feels like almost every single country within the entire Earth has to make a change. If you're a very small regional politician, it's very unlikely you're going to make change, even if you're a politician, because you feel like it's unlikely your change is going to do anything. Therefore, you're more likely to do things like brace for climate change. You're more likely to do things like, for example, attend to stockpile food for individuals, or try to do things like You're also likely to do things like build your own climate bunkers instead of actually trying to contribute to fixing this issue as a whole, right? Because it sounds like it's so impossible to fix, even government systems are likely to try to prioritize their own nation's interests and try to fix, instead of trying to fix this issue, because it seems so impossible. 2 points, their characterization and framing is that these quotas and policies are going to be implemented, like no gas or like no gasoline cars at all, right? Just listen to how absurd this is. Imagine if a politician came up to you one day and said that, well, the climate is doomed, we're going to ban all of the cars. What about the people with cars? Do you think the general public is going to support this or believe this in the first place, right? It's just very unrealistic standpoint, because it's extreme action. At the same time, it means that governments are unlikely to take this, right? You look like an extremist when you push this policy, especially when there's a lot of other countries. When you're the first one to push this policy, you don't feel like anyone will believe you, because it's just such an extreme policy in general. You as a politician yourself might not even believe this. There's no saying that governments are likely to run this. On our side, it's more likely change is going to be taking place, right? In the status quo, we're running under sort of a climate optimist model in which we believe that change can be made. That's exactly why politicians and governments themselves are still making change to prevent climate change from being a big impact. We think that people still have the incentive, and governments especially still have the incentive to push climate action on our side for a few reasons. First of all, you can still see climate change things happening within society. Even if it's not as big as like an apocalypse, you can still see like fish dying in your local ocean and things like these that you feel like you still need to tackle, right? So even without this doomerist model, you're still going to likely do these things to benefit your own economy, like try to save the fish so you actually have resources and food to eat, right? These are very important things that we think governments will still have the incentives to do so. Compared to when you take a doomerist model, you're unlikely to do this. Rather, you're trying to brace the impact instead of fixing it, even for the biggest governmental systems, because they feel like even if you're a government, you still need to require the cooperation of hundreds of other countries to try to help you and come at your aid for this to work out in the first place. Second and last point then, before I move on to the point about individuals, I'll take a point from closing. If not, then opening.
There's an island in Hong Kong that has implemented 0 cars, and this is what what Hong Kong has praised, and because it's been such a big environmental impact on Hong Kong. Explain how this is unlike if this has already happened.
Okay, first of all, this is literally Hong Kong. We're talking about a small island here. What about the other 195? What about the other 193 countries that actually have very big civilizations and very big political systems that actually need support? And it's not as easy as you just say for Hong Kong to make change. Like other places, it's not as easy for other places, especially when there's such a big international eye looking down at you. I don't think this is very likely for the majority of places. Okay, then third point on individuals and whether or not individuals are likely to make change. Okay, as stated earlier, individuals feel like this is way too extreme. There's already a reputational loss, because if you're trying to ban cars in every single place, you as an individual is affected by that, right? You're not going to support climate action if you can't take your car to your job and you have to walk, even if you live like 1 hour away from your workplace, right? You're unlikely to support this because these extreme actions directly influence you as a person. Second point, then, if you feel like everything is doomed, you're less likely to take extreme action. You're just a small person out of the 7 billion people. You feel like the things you do are obviously not going to be significant to solving this issue, right? On our side, when you actively emphasize that your actions do matter, when you actively emphasize that the world can be saved, you're more likely to take action because you feel like your actions actually matter, compared to their side when they're forcing you to do extreme action and you feel like this action isn't enough. Therefore, as stated earlier, which often actually went unresponded, is the idea that you're going to try to brace against this action. You're going to start stockpiling food instead of doing things like buying an electrical car, for example, or taking public transport, right? This means in the majority of the cases, individuals feel like everything is doomed and therefore don't feel like their actions are enough, and therefore just try to save themselves in the first place, right? And therefore, in the majority of cases, this means that individuals are unlikely to make change. Okay, let's just take their entire case at their best case scenario. Let's just say, sure, maybe the climate is doomed, which it probably isn't compared to because we're already making a lot of changes in the status quo. Let's say it is doomed. Let's say the politicians are going to be making extreme changes. Why do we still win? A few reasons. First of all, our mental health point has largely gone unresponded to. The only response we got is that you can just gradually expand or gradually say that the climate is really bad, which isn't really going to make a big difference, because at some point you're still going to be telling everyone that the world is doomed, right? This affects mental health, which has gone unresponded, and I think this is a very important case. Second thing, we explained to you that climate optimism itself works better because it's less extreme in nature, right? Even in their best case where they get these changes, we're also likely to get these changes because you're not going to be that extreme in the way you're trying to communicate these things. Politicians are more likely to implement action when it feels like the entire world isn't against them when they try to ban cars, when it feels like the entire world is supporting them when they do things like telling you to start recycling or telling you to take public transport, for example, compared to doing extreme things like banning cars, right? Because it's less extreme and it feels more likely to be actual possible. The scientific, it doesn't sound as fake. Politicians are more likely to implement this action. It's more likely to succeed.
What the opening half missed entirely is that yes, individuals are important, but the roots of climate change are the huge industrial corporations that poison the Ganges River, that emit like 50% of our emissions, the coal and fossil fuels sources used by the government. The way to solving climate change is not whether Sarah chooses a hydro flask over a plastic bottle, it's whether we're able to get companies to stop polluting the earth. That's the main crux of this debate, and that is why we will win today's debate. Couple things in my speech then. Firstly, on a couple clarifications and reframing. Secondly, on extensions, and finally on rebuttals. Firstly then, in terms of framing and clarifications then. One, let's just emphasize again what the role of the scientific community in discussions about climate change here. I want to note here also that this has never been like very clearly addressed throughout this debate, despite it being like a clear part of the motion. We want to tell you that the role of the scientific community is to hold people accountable, to humble people. Science is meant to take caution, to consider all of the possible scenarios. We think that science is often better safe than sorry. That is why we want to be so thorough. That is why we want to prepare. That's like the vibe of science that it gives. We think that it's meant to take caution and to be skeptical and to prepare for the worst, because individuals are bad at preparing for the worst if they are not told to do so already. I think it is largely better or easier to be optimistic on your own and hope and dream for like good things, but rather we need somebody to bring us back down to earth, and that is what science and facts are meant to do. But secondly, in discussions, the scientific community is where they get the facts. Arguably, they have some of the biggest influence, not just seen as opinion, but rather truth. They are where truth comes from, and that is why they have a significant influence over governments and corporations, rather than just some random politician saying, oh, we're doomed. No, it's a scientist telling you, oh, we're doomed because 25% of emissions are doing this, this, this. I have this much research about this, 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 and look at all of my peers in the scientific community. They all agree with me. We think that that is the kind of information where this is coming from, which completely reframes the debate by saying, by showing again just how powerful the word of the scientific community is in our current status quo. For example, during COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he was able to greatly influence the way that the government was able to handle COVID and the distribution of COVID vaccines, told people to be safe. People listen to scientific authority and not political authority, because scientific authority has a lot of data and research. We think that that is why the scientific community, firstly, has a lot of influence, which is the prerequisite to everything that is said in the opening half of this debate, but also secondly, that they need to be able to take a very more pessimistic stance, because humans are just more likely to be optimistic in the first place, because they have a better conception of what good things are rather than just how bad things can get, especially for those living in Western liberal democracies. That's why this motion is uniquely important. But secondly, what does our side look like? I'll take that in a bit. We want to tell you that, for example, having climate doomism is not just telling everybody that they're going to die, but especially because we're looking from a scientific perspective, or this is what the scientific community is saying. It's, for example, linking climate change to other disasters, like natural disasters, the spread of disease like COVID or monkeypox, or for example, like different things like flooding in Bangladesh, which is very realistic and very proximate. And we think that climate doomerism is reality. Like just last week, again, millions of people were affected by Bangladeshi flooding because of climate change. Sure, it's not the end for Elon Musk sitting in his refrigerated bat cave, but for those who are the most vulnerable, oftentimes in the global south, who are disproportionately affected by climate change, climate doomerism is their reality. They are actively losing their lives and their families and their loved ones because of climate change. We think that that is where opening opposition especially has been entirely and extremely ignorant. We think that once we spread this and once scientists actively show you, hey, this is happening, that's when we get people to buy in and when we respond. Also, finally, on the point of bracing, we think that it's very unlikely that politicians, once hearing this information, or the public hearing this information, is just going to brace. Like, what is that even going to look like? But even if we do just brace, it is still better that because there's real life impacts that are happening right now. If building seawalls are bracing, then we're fine with that, because it means that one more family has a home. If we're stocking up, then it means that one less family is going to die from starvation in the future. We don't necessarily see how that's a bad thing. Before moving on, I'll take that POI.
Okay, so you talked about how scientists are able to convince people and corporations. Is Shell or oil corporations seriously going to listen to a scientist if they say that they must shut down their company in order to solve climate change?
Okay, let me mech this out for you because it's actually my extension here because I think that the opening government doesn't really give us much mechanization on how this is actually going to work. So for example, if the scientist is now messaging very, very heavily with a lot of facts and a lot of things that like you cannot dispute as being true, then that is when individuals are no longer able to speculate about, oh, maybe climate change is not that bad or not like this. No, this is reality because it is science. So therefore, we think that when individuals are able to see this and when politicians see this, but especially even when like companies see this, then not only are the individuals going to pressure both politicians and the companies, but it also means that these investors of the companies are no longer able to ignore the fact that this is happening. They're no longer able to brush this off as, oh, this is just some political hoax or something that is trying to make us lose money. But no, this is a scientific community who has this kind of authority established already that is telling you these things. But we also think that, for example, companies and politicians, they're just unable to like try to scapegoat the pressure of like becoming more environmentally friendly because they cannot argue against the fact. And again, yeah, investors are likely to withhold investments if they think that the industry is self-destructive destructing, because if they're planting their product and it actively destroys their foundation, that is something that is going to harm their ability to make money as well. But even if we take our very, very worst case and say that individuals feel hopeless, sure, let's say that people brace for apocalypse. But also, we think that when people are desperate, that's when individuals are desperate and they feel like they cannot do anything on their own, that is when they turn towards figures of authority to save them. So we believe that not only do governments and companies are more likely to feel that kind of urgency just on their own, but people are not just going to be driven because we want change, but literally save me from the floods that are coming, save me from this doom, do something about it so that we can have a fighting chance. That is what is going to be the like delta, and that is what is going to be driving them to do something. If they feel powerless as individuals to solve climate change, that's when we turn pressures back to institutions who actually need to take responsibility for this crisis, and that's when they feel like they do have power. We think that this is extremely important, and this is why we weigh over opening government, because firstly, again, we told you why specifically the scientific community is important. But secondly, we tell you why companies and companies especially are the ones who are going to make change and who are likely to listen to these people. That is when politicians are pressured. It's at that point of desperation in individuals. For all these reasons, I'm so proud to propose.
I think one thing to notice here is that opening government gave us an extremely uncharitable portrayal of the status quo, right? They say that the science community has failed us and that we have already seen an increasing use of, we have already seen a very apocalyptic sign from climate change and that we should brace for the worst, right? But we believe that it's extremely uncharitable for them to say that the scientific community is not credible and that we should like at the status quo, people are just not listening to them because the scientific community is still the representation of the forefront of humanities, and they're still relying on years of data and scientific method to give us pragmatic solutions to things such as climate change. But even if we assume in their best case that, okay, people actually don't trust in scientific communities now, I think it kind of killed their own case as well. Because if people do not trust scientific communities, they even have less incentive to actually listen to them when the scientific community tell them that they're doomed. If people already do not believe in them, they're likely going to pin the blame on these scientific communities for and saying that the reason why they're doomed is because that the scientific community has not been actively trying to save humanity and they have failed humanity. And it's still largely unclear as to why climate doomerism is the tipping point to why people are suddenly going to trust these communities and build bunkers in the tundra with you and try to save themselves, right? It's still extremely unclear, and that the opening government didn't really give us enough mechanism to actually substantiate this statement. But now closing government came up and say that, okay, people actually do still trust in scientific communities and that climate doomerism is actively happening right now, and it's something that we have to pay urgency to. And they give us examples such as the floodings in Bangladesh, right? Note that the closing government always gave us some life and death situation on Earth, and that people would obviously save themselves from these natural disasters. They do not need this narrative of climate doomerism to know that, oh, maybe I have to build a wall to save my family, or maybe I have to do some urgent actions in order to save my family from flooding. It's obviously common sense that people would still try to save themselves in those life and death situations and in places that like Bangladesh. And the closing government always the closing government came up and say that people would pressure those not eco-friendly institutions to try to change, such as like companies like Shell. We believe it's very unlikely because the people that actually face acute climate change issues usually are not people who have a lot of power, such as if people in Sri Lanka are suffering from extreme flooding, or their island is already sinking under the sea level. It's very unlikely for you to say that the people in Sri Lanka are now going to advocate extremely towards those institutions that are not eco-friendly or not doing good for the planet, because they are not the people who actually hold a lot of bargaining power. And even if they start holding bans towards Shell, the marginal impacts that they can make towards these institutions is still very marginal, right? So moving on to the first argument that I'd like to bring out in this debate, which is the incentives for actions on the opposition side. And I would like to also substantiate some arguments, extensions on what the OO failed to mention. So 3 layers I want to talk about under this. The first layer is, what does climate optimism actually look like on the closing opposition side? We believe there's two things important to know here. The first thing is that the scientific community promotes new solutions to solve climate problems, to persuade people to take actions. This is most likely the case because, first of all, you need to show concrete plans to the people in order for them to believe that you actually have the ability to change, right? And you also give people a direct direction to what they should do. Secondly, you also have more involvement in eco-friendly actions. This is the case because when you know what you're doing is actively helping you sustain your own life, you have more incentive to do this due to several reasons. The first reason is you get more personal fulfillment when you actually try to actively solve the issues of climate change, right? You can see the results of your efforts. You can see the amount of reduction in carbon emissions, for example, and you can see that you're buying something that is more eco-friendly, and it's something that you can actually directly take actions in. And for corporations, it's actually way more profitable to actually be involved in those climate friendly actions, because if you invent a new technology that is green, you profit off of it and you earn a better image as a business as self, since this is a natural change in the society right now, and that people try to advocate for green products. Like basically you don't have to actually push a doomerism narrative for those companies to actively try to do better in terms of saving the climate. And secondly, you also have a lower bar of entry to do this, to do actions that actually help the planet, right? Because it's way easier for you to try to live an eco-friendly life, such as having an electronic vehicle or buying something that's eco-friendly, than you moving thousands of miles away from your home to camp in a random mountain so you can save yourself from the supposed very acute climate change that is somehow going to affect you. So moving on to the second layer then, why is this important? We believe that climate optimism serves as an incentive for people to solve climate actively, and that they can take active commitments to reduce the harm that they have caused right now. And they have the ability to set off a lot of harms, such as green energy or better ways to reduce carbon emissions. These do not exist on the government side because they wait until the harms are actually inflicted upon them. And it's very obvious and very irreversible. Now, what is the impact of this then? We believe there's two main impacts of this argument. The first one is that the scientific community would still be actively trying to solve climate issues on our side, right? They would still have developments, innovations, such as what we saw, companies developing solar panels, or just quite recently, like other scientific communities discovering nuclear fusion as a cleaner way to produce energy. This will not only help with the climate change, but it will actually help with the general society as well, as we have seen a lot of implementation of solar panels on electronic vehicles and actually improve the general welfare of people's lives as well. But we also get a more united front in which people are actively trying to solve climate change issues, and that people are actually optimistically doing this thing and thinking that they have the chance, they have the opportunity to change what is now the government side trying to say is unchangeable. Due to all of these reasons, we are really proud to propose.
We think science is better safe than sorry. Like, that is how science has always been. So this doomerism isn't something exclusive to climate change. Like, do we wear an apron in the chemical lab because we know for sure this toxic substance will spill? No, but we still do it for the worst case, right? We don't think it hurts to be safer than sorry. Besides that, for humans, it'll make mental health a bit bad, but we have rebutted that, and I'll clarify what that rebut looked like on our side, right? And I think also I know that we are the only exclusive team to show you what the impact of climate change looks like on a daily basis for people, whether that looks like the Bangladesh flood that Brooke told you about, lack of food, forced immigration, etc. It is really the reality for a lot of people, and for especially the most vulnerable people. This also rebuts OO's crux of their case about how people won't be motivated. It will especially be motivated if it's related to their lives, and even if it's not going to be related to like the rich people who aren't actually affected by this. We already told you why those people will still be motivated to help and why they have the obligation to do so, and how this motion of doomerism is going to propel themselves to do so. And I'll rehash that later on in my speech. So 3 things I'll be doing in my speech: how we win over OO, second over CG, and lastly over our opening. First, in OO, just note that the case is pretty not engaging, right? They don't try to engage with the best case that people will be motivated coming from government side. Their first and second speaker was just saying how people are unmotivated, but even if we say that is true, they have been unable to beat our case using our best case. If they are able to win the debate, they should be able to win even if they take our best case. That people will be motivated, right? Know that the crux of the case has been saying that it makes people unmotivated since they're at doom, so they'd rather brace for it than actually go towards change. 2 layers. Firstly, yes, but if it is dooming, then they're often going to turn to the authorities who will tell them the correct things. For example, they might be talking about COVID, how people instead they try to stock up on toilet paper or whatnot, right? The reason that people stocked up on food and etc. is because the authorities, the government told them to do so, because the scientific community told them that the government that this is what they should do, right? The same thing applies in this debate. And secondly, they tell you how people are still reminded that it's proximate, that they can still solve it. Note that it'll be more like they looked at the company instead, these big companies, right? Because obviously they want to solve it so quickly. If the scientific community tells them that it's so urgent, the heads will turn to the companies, because people do realize that it's these companies, these big companies are those that make the biggest impact. Therefore, if these companies are taking responsibility of, they're going to make the biggest impact when they take away the things that the environmental impact, negative impacts they have made. Secondly, lastly, they talk about quotas and policies made, that this will seem crazy, the politicians can't make them if there's so much backlash. Note that we have differentiated from our side that it's not political authorities that are pushing this, it's the scientific authorities, right? Companies and politicians are more likely to act on this if there are going to be scientific push from the scientific authorities, right? Even if we take our worst and say individuals feel hopeless, sure, let's say people brace for the apocalypse, but also when people are desperate, they turn towards figures of authority to save them. So they will be campaigning throughout the streets if they feel powerless as individuals to solve climate change. So that's when they turn towards institutions they feel do have the power. Furthermore, if politicians and presidents are being advised by scientists emphasizing doomism, they're more likely to prioritize the environment when negotiating with companies, and they're more likely to go hardline. More mech is that climate doomerism highlights the risk of extreme weather events and resource scarcity, which can disrupt supply chains, right? So companies will be motivated to adopt more sustainable and resilient practices to safeguard their operations and reduce vulnerability to climate change disruptions, right? I think the strongest thing that comes from opening opposition is their push on mental health. But note that on both sides, people will still feel anxiety. In fact, I think people will feel worse anxiety on their side when they're already dying from climate change, but no one else can no one else actually relates to them or feels bad for them, right? It's especially worse if they're dying and no one pays attention to them. Then moving on to closing government, right? They tell you how people are, if they are already dying, then they won't need the extent of doomers. And we tell you that you need to signal to those that are not dying, right? So we need science to bring those privileged people down to the level of not privileged people, right? And this is so important to this debate because the most vulnerable people in today's debate are these minorities in these countries, in these developing countries especially, or even minorities in developed countries who have who are going to be most impacted by this, right? By climate change, right? They say that they give directions for what they should do on their side. They give more directions, right? We tell you that the same exists on our side, if not more, because on our side, because it's going to be so much urgent, the scientific community will go along with it and tell them this is what you need to do in order to maximize our time and efficiency, because we have to be so urgent, right? And they say how on their side they lower the bar to help the planet. Yes, but it's not like people on our side will think that as an individual will cause dramatic change, right? They have CG hasn't heard us differentiate ourselves from our opening, because we've told you that what citizens will do instead of just like thinking that their own self is going to create so much dramatic change. Rather, they'll turn their heads to the companies, right? And note that we're not going to be when they say they're not going to preemptive, literally their openings pushed toward us will be bunker up, aka take preemptive measures to mitigate the effects of climate change. This is contradictory to their opening. There's no reason as to why. There's no mechanism as to why they say they're going to do this. And just note that they just didn't give any extensions from their opening. Then moving on to how we win over OG. What did they say? They mainly focused on individual action, which is really good, and they did well at proving why individuals on our side will take more action. But what's more important is an impact to note the doomerism is that heads will turn to the companies, which is going to create the most amount of change. What they missed and what we said is that our exclusive extensions have been reasons why doomerism more motivates than unmotivates, why how we help minorities, including those in developing nations, and that we are able to target companies, right? They don't really prove why doomerism will cause people to be motivated more instead of unmotivated, and we give that mechanism. For example, like the psychology of humans during a crisis and how they turn to authorities. And this is essential to this debate because with that proof, any benefit of doomerism is possible to take place and have impact in this debate. Plus, the crux of opening opposition's case was proving why doomerism isn't going to create motivation to make a change. So this was essential to prove from opening, but they weren't able to do this. We have been the closing side that was able to do this. So why is what we said more important? We told you the root problem and the cause of the climate change, which are going to be the big companies and how faces will turn to them. How are we going to win over opening? If we're able to prove that we can better target the root problem. They do talk about how individuals kind of are more motivated to make a difference, but I think that's just a surface. We've shown how we are able to solve the even deeper, how our government side is able to solve it more deeper, which are going to be these companies. So we show you how there's more of a magnitude on solving on our side. And also under their definition, the most important stakeholder are the citizens, which we show you are better able to achieve this by focusing on the big companies. And uniquely, not even just opposed to our opening, I think uniquely out of this whole debate, right, we are the ones that focus on the most vulnerable, aka the minorities in developed countries, those also in developing countries. Minorities are going to be the vulnerable populations because they're going to be the hardest hit by the extreme weathers events such as hurricanes, floods, drought, and heat waves, and all of those. We've told you why these people need to be saved, and therefore why other policies are going to be made, and why people will be more motivated to help out these people. And for all those reasons, so proud to propose.
Few pieces of responses before moving on to my major piece of wing on which side actually provides a better incentive for people to take action. So then, firstly, onto my major piece of response towards closing government. They say, the crux of their case is that, people turn to authorities when they believe that they're doomed because there's a direct urgency to them, right? I think I just want to point out that it's really unlikely that's going to succeed, right? Because as Jim already told you, these regions are severely affected by climate change. But I think it just means that they do not have the power to go and lobby these kind of governments and companies, right? Because when you're no longer sure if you are able to survive tomorrow, you don't know when you're going to drown, when you are not sure if you can put food on your table tomorrow, I don't think you're going to have the time and effort and the money to actually put in resources to go and lobby the government, right? But two, I also want to point out that the benefits they get under their side is quite marginal, right? Because these regions who are severely affected are still the minority. I think the implication of this is just that majority of people in society will not buy the narrative because they do not feel the urgency personally, right? For example, if you're still chilling in New York and in an aircon house, I don't see why you're going to have you're going to feel the urgency of these people living in Bangladesh who are facing I think, no, thank you. I think only under our side of house, when you show these people that, you need to take direct action, when you show them that these actions that they're taking actually have some kind of value to them, is when you're able to motivate these kind of majorities of privileged people under our side of house. But three, even if we take you out of your best case, you say people who are affected by climate change are still going to advocate for better change measures. I think I just want to point out that this is still symmetrical, right? Because if you're already feeling the direct urgency that maybe you're gonna die tomorrow, I think you are already super motivated to make some change for yourself, because if you don't, you're probably still gonna die tomorrow. I think these are still things that happens under our side house. So then, before moving on to my piece of wing, yes.
When New Yorkers were passing out due to the heat, and when scientists present climate change caused heat waves as a national crisis like COVID, you don't need to lobby the government for them to do something about it.
Yeah, but this just proves that it's still symmetrical under our side house, because it also proves that you do not need the narratives to show them that the earth is gonna be doomed tomorrow to make them feel action, right? So yes, moving on to my piece of wing on which side actually provides a better incentive for people to take action. What we get from opening government is that yes, you create a sense of urgency by doomerism. I just want to point out again that urgency exists under both sides of the house. The comparative is that under our side of the house, you're no longer forced to make these kind of actions because you actually feel the value of your own actions, right? For example, if you know that like maybe reducing less carbon emissions today means that you're going to save the earth, you feel the sense of personal fulfillment that does not exist under their side of house simply because you feel like you're forced to do so. If you don't do so, you're going to die. But are reduced, or it can simply show them that a new technology has been invented under our house. I think the reason why this is extremely important is because you feel a lot more incentivized when you actually see the results of your actions that you're making, right? But also secondly, simply because hope is a way more accessible incentive for people, because when you give a direct sense of obligation to people, for example, if you turn off the aircon for a few more hours today, you can save yourself because you have less carbon emissions. You have a direct sense of obligation to them, but also too simply because when you incentivize people to take action on their own, that's when they feel like they're doing something good to Earth instead of being forced to make these kind of decisions. I think these are emotions that are only exclusive under our side of the house. But secondly, on the level of corporations, I think these corporations are actually more incentivized under our side of the house, because when you actually profit out of being proactive with these kind of environmental actions, you're way more motivated, right? So I think the reason why this is exclusive under our side of the house isn't because only under our side of the house you get these kind of first mover advantages. No, I won't take any more. I think the reason why this is only exclusive under our side of the house is because when you're actually forced out of urgency by, I don't know, these desperate people, you do not show yourself as being a proactive company, right? But it also means that at the same time, there's a lot of many other companies who have the same incentive as you lose these kind of first mover advantages that can bring you way more profit. But secondly, because you are no longer able to build the image of being a good business, right? So for example, you're only trying to solve these kind of environmental problems because someone in Bangladesh is dying, instead of because you care about the earth and want to be a company that benefits society. I think the difference between the amount of things and the difference between the image of how people view you is extremely different. We say these are self incentives that side government does not get under their side house. For all these reasons above, so proud to oppose.